searching, I can't find what I'm looking for. Lord, it's such a shame. Everybody's got a game. Lord, it's mighty tough when you don't know who to trust. For once in my life, I'd like to see just a little truth, Lord, and a little bit of honesty. But I can't find it. I can't find it. Lord, I can't find it. I've been searching all my life. I've been searching. I've been searching. I've been searching. I can't find what I'm looking for. Lord, what I wouldn't give. Find somebody real. I don't mean folks shaking your hand and doing you in when they get a chance. I need somebody who's not afraid.
Attention this afternoon, an 8-year-old boy who went to school black-faced, as you see there, to give a speech on Martin Luther King Jr. The Colorado second grader dressed up as the civil rights leader, complete with black paint on his face as part of a class history project. But the costume didn't go over well. His painted face offended some students and a teacher, and he was sent home after refusing to wash it off.
As you may have heard, NBC Today host Megyn Kelly's show was canceled this past week following her on-air remarks expressing acceptance of blackface. It's a racist show business practice most of us thought was long gone. But as Maurice Dubois is about to tell us, blackface has a long history in our country. And we caution you, his report unavoidably includes many offensive and disturbing images.
It happens all too frequently, often at Halloween, but not exclusively.
They thought it was a joke, but it really just was not funny at all.
For example, 2 years ago in Maplewood, New Jersey.
Her daughter posted this photo of herself and a friend in blackface.
The two girls had no idea what blackface was or the history of it.
The history of blackface is long and complex and deeply ingrained in our culture.
Who was that lady I saw you with this afternoon? That was no lady. That was my wife.
Even Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd blacked up.
Fantastic, isn't it?
For more than 100 years, white and then black performers wore dark makeup and created not only a popular theatrical form, but stereotypes that are still with us today.
This makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It does make me feel uncomfortable to talk about these things because they are incredibly disturbing and revolting.
Eric Lott, a professor at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, says blackface represents a strange mix of envy, fascination, desire, and fear.
Explain the fear part to me. What are these white performers, what are these white people afraid of?
They're afraid of black groups, mobs, rising up and taking the power.
Minstrel shows began in the 1830s, and white performers used burnt cork or later black grease paint. Minstrelsy eventually became the most popular form of entertainment in the country.
Ah, yes.
I asked Margot Jefferson, the Pulitzer Prize-winning critic, to look at some images from the New York Public Library.
The shininess of the black against the big white clown's mouth, the hat, the overlong tailcoat, mocking. It always gives me the jolt that racist history does. Blackface is so tied to comedy, to people enjoying themselves, to people having fun, that rattles you still more.
Well, Mr. Tambo, you seem to be enjoying yourself this evening. Enjoying myself? I sure is.
White minstrel performers claim that what they did on stage was based on their perceptions of how black people lived.
Some of this came out of a genuine fascination with the music, the songs, the dances, the performance styles of black people.
But it's also where Jump Jim Crow was born, along with other characters depicted as lazy, lying, or buffoonish. Remember, this was all happening before the Civil War.
Slavery was all about creating visions, types, stereotypes of an entire race of people as subhuman in every way.
By the 1860s, African Americans began using blackface on stage.
Why on earth would a black performer put on blackface and demean him or herself?
Look, this is the 19th century. They had limited options. They were expected to.
Why?
Because it made the audiences comfortable. You can be fascinated, you can be excited, but you can always feel superior.
In effect, the black makeup on a black performer became a theatrical mask with many layers of meaning. Professor Eric Lott.
The mask, I think, says to white audiences, you have nothing to fear. Go ahead, enjoy yourself. To black audiences, I think any number of things might have been communicated, like, can you believe that these people are making me put on this mask so they will be entertained? You know, in other words, there's a kind of winking to the black audience. But it gave black performers access to the stage.
One of the biggest black stars to come out of the minstrel tradition was Burt Williams, who wore blackface from vaudeville to Broadway.
It's clear that he was a genius of a performer.
But how did he reconcile performing in this demeaning art form?
He was very melancholy about it. He knew it was necessary for his career, as all other black performers knew it.
Minstrelsy on stage basically died out in the 1920s, but blackface lived on in the movies.
I'd walk a million miles, but one of your smiles.
In 1927, Al Jolson starred in the pioneering talking picture The Jazz Singer, playing a young man who prefers singing popular music rather than his family's traditional Hebrew prayers.
West, but I know where the sunshine sets.
I don't want to look at it. What reaction do you get?
I totally understand.
Wait a minute. I don't like the way he said that.
In the Our Gang comedies of the 1930s, Spanky appeared in blackface.
Buckwheat, did you say Spanky was in a lot of trouble? Yes, sir.
The gag here is that the gang doesn't realize that that's Spanky in blackface until they actually see Buckwheat.
Hiya, Buckwheat. Hiya, Buckwheat.
So the gist of it is that you put blackface makeup on anyone and they become black.
And that's supposed to be hilarious.
And it's supposed to be really funny.
When he grows up.
And it goes on. During the golden age of the Hollywood musical, Judy Garland.
When he walks down the street, folks will say, pleased to meet Mr. Franklin D. Roosevelt Jones.
Bing Crosby.
That's why we celebrate this blessed February day, Abraham.
Fred Astaire, and many others, all blacked up. It's still in the culture.
It is too easy, I think, simply to dismiss the history of blackface as that racist stuff. And most of us are better than that. I don't think most of us are better than that. We are that. That's what we are.
You know, some people say in order to move forward, we need to put this stuff behind us, as painful, as just upsetting that it may be.
Well, you know, any form of history that gets suppressed or repressed or erased out, it comes back to haunt. What has to happen now is a discussion, an acknowledgement of this charged, complicated, painful history.
W.E.B. Du Bois stated that 100 million people were kidnapped from Africa and brought to the Western Hemisphere of the world. And these lands, South America, the Caribbean, and North America, the kidnapping of the African people was one of the most horrendous crimes ever known to the world. Out of this crime, the concept of slavery, originally introduced to the Caucasian, European, and whites by the Moorish of North Africa, and how to treat them, and how to make slaves. From that, we got the concept of chattel slavery, a concept never known to humanity before North America, a concept that introduced into slavery a fact that an African person was no longer a human being, but became part of the chattel of the enslaver, meaning that this person or these people are now reduced to property, having no human rights whatsoever, and totally owned by another person. And within this ownership, one had the right or rights to dispose of their chattel however they wanted to, including murder. To think that these people were brought to America on the ships, and many times these ships, human cargo consisted of up to 900 people, which means that the cargo or the hull of the ship had to be packed in order for this transatlantic voyage is made profitable. What we do know is that until 1930, the world did not know what had happened to these people. Of course, there are black people around the world, but there was no connection as to where the black folk in North America actually came from. And we still are having problems understanding exactly where they came from. But an Oriental lady made the connection, a fundamental connection, and drove that connection directly to West Coast and interior of Africa. Now, it's hard to believe that up until 1930, no one knew where the African Americans or the Black Americans actually came from. There's, as far as nobody, meaning the world community. But in the process of these people landing in America by way of a voyage, they lost their humanity. They lost their language, their identity, their culture, their human connection to the world. And finally, they lost their religion and their concept of God Almighty, highly glorified is He. Of the 5 basic human elements, the most important of all is the loss of fundamental concept of God Almighty. Now, emptying out all of these fundamental components of humanity and then replacing those components with a new man, a man that spoke the language of his oppressor and enslaver, given an identity foreign to his nature, creating a culture based on a slave camp environment, disconnected from the world, having no idea about other human beings around the planet, having no concept of the reality and identity of other people, unlike themselves. And finally, the expulsion of God, their creator, out of their souls and out of their minds, and replaced with a new God that very much resembled in physical features, given an idol to worship. And its physical features were primarily the exact same features as their oppressor and enslaver. Now these people, hundreds of thousands, were murdered, and killed, and brutalized. Many of them were lynched, burned at the stakes, decapitated, limbs were cut off their bodies, all for a purpose. And the purpose was to reduce them to less than animals, beat them down, and make them ultimately afraid and fearful of their oppressors and captors. This torture went on for centuries, and the terror can be felt even today. Thousands were lynched for very simple reasons. For an example, looking at one of their captors in the eye could result in a man's life being taken. Or walking and not stepping aside when one of the captors came back could lose his life. In many cases, just displaying a simple intellect caused a man or a woman to lose their lives. But after the Civil War or the war that liberated the African American people and gave them some sense of freedom. Out of all of this came the blackface. And the blackface was a form of entertainment for Caucasians, Europeans, and whites, painting themselves, dressing themselves to look like black folk, talking like the oppressed, beaten down, and destroyed black man and woman, mimicking their motion, mimicking their body language, painting their face and napping up their hair, all for entertainment. All for entertainment and making mockery of the oppressed black man and woman, laughing and joking, having fun after 300 years of brutal, inhumane treatment. Came a period where the mocking took place, notoriously displaying the hate. Today, 2019, there are people still making mockery of the struggle of African American people, the struggle of the black man and woman of America, by painting their faces black and believing that the act is harmless, displaying this conduct right before the eyes of the oppressed, thinking that it's a fundamental constitutional right of free speech, displaying their freedom, and again making mockery of the suffering of millions of people. Blackface today is a horrendous crime, unlike any other modern attack on people. It's the ultimate public display of racism. It's the ugliest and most degrading thing that one can do as they are thinking about the ways and habits, emotions, and language of black people. Blackface.